Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. With me, as always, Jen David Lang. Hi, Jen.
Hey, no adjective today.
No adjective today. I'm not feeling it. It's Sunny, my sunny colleague, Jen. Um, and joining us here today, we have a great guest with us, Chase Milkey. Hi, Chase.
Hey, how are y'all?
Fantastic.
Good.
So Chase wrote the book Illuminate the Way: The School Leader's Guide to Addressing and Preventing Teacher Burnout. So before we dive into that fabulous topic, well, it's not fabulous, but the topic itself
Useful topic.
is useful, great. Chase, first of all, where's this podcast find you today?
Yeah, so I am coming from my house in Kalamazoo, Michigan. There really is a Kalamazoo. Also dealing with some good sun outside. It is finally beautiful in Michigan, despite the many chaotic ups and downs of the weather. We're in a good space. Even if burnout across the nation isn't in a great space, I'm going to leverage this moment of some good to try to find some hope in the sunlight ahead.
I love it. I came down for this podcast to my apartment where I was sitting on the roof because it was so nice.
Right.
And because I'm in Albany, New York, we don't get much of these days. And Jen, you're in Brooklyn, right?
I'm in Brooklyn, but
Yeah.
always happy to have sun. And I think we were all inspired by the eclipse yesterday. So
Right.
Oh, okay. Every time I hear that, I just want to break into song with Bonnie Tyler, but I'm not going to.
we
Turn
played her while I was watching. We blasted her. Nobody seemed to appreciate that around me in Prospect Park, but we blasted
Of
Total
course.
Eclipse of the Heart.
Turn around, Bright Eyes. Okay, so here we go. All right, Chase. So talk to us about why teacher burnout is a topic for a book. What's the problem here? I mean, I think it's sort of self-evident, but
Right, yeah.
you really do a nice job of laying out the case for it in a
Yeah.
very compelling way.
Yeah. So my experience with burnout is kind of similar to how I've seen it play out across the nation, where, my background as an English language arts teacher, psychology teacher, instructional coach. I lived in the classroom. That was my area of emphasis. And so I really thought through the lens of like burnout and the challenges of education through the individual lens of, like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, American mindset of like, if you're having a hard time, it's on you to develop the strategies, the skills necessary to combat and overcome the challenges of education. And absolutely, there are research-based strategies. And I wrote a whole book called The Burnout Cure, which was my personal experience of using concepts from positive psychology and neuropsychology to not just survive, but thrive in education. But as I started getting into more opportunities to work with schools and work with other teachers and expand beyond my district, I realized like the individual isn't at fault. Like burnout isn't a cause of an individual lacking skills and ability. It's an organizational factor. It has to do with how the profession functions, how work overloads happen and exhaustion, and how we become cynical, and how we are or are not supported with developing skill. And so I realized there's this huge missing piece of the puzzle of how do we get into the real research and real depth of both on the individual and the organizational lens, like what can we do? Because we know that teachers are burning out nationwide. Consistently, teaching rates is one of the highest levels of burnout. I believe the last statistic I saw was 44% of educators felt burned out or exhausted daily. And some of the next closest in the medical field were only in the 30%. We know that as of a couple of years ago, only about 12% of educators feel highly satisfied. And it's not just like teachers not feeling good about going to work. We see it ripple out towards students, where students of burned out teachers, they have lower performance on academic measures like math and literacy scores. We know that they have lower engagement levels. They feel more cynical. And we know it's not just correlational, it's causational as well. And so for me, it was, if we care about students, we have to care about teachers and how their organizations look.
I want to add that part of why I chose to feature your book and the main
Mm.
idea is because of your whole approach to burnout. And I just
Mhm.
want listeners I just want to emphasize what you said, that it's not an individual problem, it's an
Yeah.
organizational one. And I also do some workshops on preventing
Mm.
burnout. And I like to show an image of a flower and
Mm.
say, like, if the flower is wilting, right,
Right.
what do you
Yeah.
do, right? You fix the environment, the soil, that, right, and so I appreciate that your focus is organizational, not individual,
Hmm.
not just let's buy some donuts for teachers, how
Right.
can we change the conditions? And I think your ideas are very hopeful.
Hmm.
You say in the book that by 2025, we may have as many as 200,000 unfilled teaching
Hmm.
positions. So after reading your book, if leaders implement what you're suggesting, we may very well be able to prevent some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things that you talk about in the book, how you kind of organize the book, is around four mindsets that
Hmm.
conveniently all begin with the letter C. So do you want to talk us through what those mindsets are for leaders? And
Yeah.
then what I'm really excited about is after that, we're going to get into some of the unhelpful paradigms
Hmm.
that when I read what you wrote about those, I I had flashbacks of
Hmm.
myself saying and thinking those things as a principal. So a moment of shame, but I'm over it.
Why don't we switch them, Mike? Let's switch them. Why don't we share the unhelpful paradigms and then the C's as sort of a
Yeah, I
response to
feel
them?
like that was
Hmm.
a good tease to like make people wait
Yeah.
for it, but okay, we'll go. So what are the unhelpful paradigms, Chase? And I'm curious, how did you get to crystallize those? Because I know I've felt that and I've said that, but I've never had sort of the circumspection to, identify them discreetly.
Yeah, yeah. There's a number of paradigms that I think are plaguing education, and I'll talk a few generally, and then if there are some specific ones you want to nerd out on, I would love to nerd out on them. But I think a lot of times one of the paradigms that we have in our mind is that education is inherently stressful, and so therefore like teachers are always going to be stressed, and I heard that from a lot of school leaders of like they're going to be burned out. That's a part of it. Like not recognizing how much we can do, and I think one of the most important shifts for a lot of educators is moving from this idea of dichotomies to continuums. Of it's not either we're all stressed or not stressed. It's not either like everyone's burned out or everyone is like singing and dancing and skipping in the hallways. That we're really looking at this idea of degrees and how we're able to minimize or mitigate some of the exhaustion and some of the workload. We know, for example, that when educators feel even like slightly listened to, like if they feel like their school leader listens to them, they're 72% less likely to burn out. And that's one of those pieces of like, we can do that even if there are exhaustion levels and there are workload levels that are overwhelming us. Like, we can ask and for illicit feedback and we can hear responses and try to respond to that feedback in a way that still achieves academic goals, but allows us to know that have our staff know that we have their back and support them. And so that's one of the many ones that comes to mind is just moving from this idea of the dichotomies to much more of the continuum focus. Are there other ones that came to mind that you want to nerd out about?
Mm, the idea that, the antidote to stress is self-care.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that, and it's so funny because I've heard people say, like we can't yoga our way out of this.
Yep.
Like, um, so I don't know, I just think that's interesting because I just got caught up in this like loop with some folks that I work with about, well,
Mm,
maybe maybe we should focus on self-care for our next managers meeting. And I was all in, and then I'm like, you know what? Wait a second. No.
mm,
But
yeah.
it is interesting because that's kind of, you know, it has felt like, at least I think from my perspective as an administrator, that I haven't had the tools to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I've been
Mm-hmm.
thinking of it in like you said, like it's all American bootstrap it, man,
Yeah.
just harder, but not so much.
And and I think the other one also is, we've now been out of the pandemic for a while, right? So we've had
Right.
time
Yeah.
in the pandemic, out of the pandemic, and leaders are seeing teachers not show up for work regularly, or even when they
Mm-hmm.
are, they're not fully engaged. So leaders are getting tired and they're getting frustrated. So I think
Right.
that paradigm of like, yeah, teaching is just stressful,
Right.
there's nothing I can do about it, as opposed to what you're saying, that not only are schools but leaders in particular are
Yeah.
uniquely positioned to work on the conditions of the school. So I think
Yeah.
some of that paradigm too.
Yeah, and that's a great, like, I want to add a huge caveat here that school leaders are also burning out. Like all of this research that applies to teachers in the classroom and paraprofessionals and social workers, like it is absolutely happening to school leaders, superintendents, assistant principals as well. And I think that's one of the important things to note is that the research around burnout, like it is pretty much looking at across careers. Burnout happens in very similar ways across all professions. Education just has its unique flavor of some of those dimensions and some of those challenges. And so I think if we not only care about shifting the systems, we have to look holistically. How does this impact school leaders' workload and cynicism and sense of efficacy? How does it impact teachers? That if we approach the system, everyone benefits, not just the teachers.
Yeah, and as I was reading your book, I was thinking about, leaders reading this
Mm,
and sort of turning it on them, like the four
yeah,
mindsets. So we
right.
said we're going to talk about like the four mindsets as an antidote to some of the unhelpful ways of thinking about it. And then after the four mindsets, if we could talk about the three
Yeah,
dimensions.
yeah,
But the mindsets work also for yourself.
yeah,
But yeah, so can you tell us about the compass mindset,
yeah.
curiosity mindset, compassion, and creativity? You don't have to cover all, but if you want to share a few of them and how they're a more helpful way of thinking about it if you want to be the type of leader who really moves beyond burnout and
Yeah,
supports.
for sure. Well, of course, I had to have the mnemonic device because as an English teacher, I had to figure out a way to make that work. So that's why they all start with a C. It kind of outframing for a moment, what was really important to me is to look at burnout the same way we would treat any sort of goal we would have in a school. Like if we're trying to raise literacy scores, we would probably go about it in the same way as we could with burnout. And so starting, I believe it's really important to identify a compass goal, like what is a positively framed goal. So rather than being like, I don't want all my staff to be cynical or I don't want them to complain every time we bring in a new initiative, if we flip that to a goal of, I want my staff to feel comfortable voicing up concerns or I want my staff to feel energized when we have to bring in a new initiative, not only does the goal give us a sense of hope, but probably the strategies that go along with it are more strength based and allow us to move forward. So it goes from like victim blaming of like my staff is always cynical to more of a supportive lens of how do I help them find the energy, find the support, find the sense of trust in order to move forward. So I think that's the first most important part. Just as with the literacy improvement, we would set a positive goal of where we want to reach and strive for. We can do the same thing with burnout measures and well-being. And once we have that, and that can be a number of things, it can be anything that we think is impacting, even if it is, I want more applicants to apply for these positions that are opening up. And then we start to work through, okay, let's do some current assessment. And so then we start to move into the curiosity mindset of we should be asking for and collecting data around well-being, around engagement, the same way we would collect data for students on their literacy practice or their mathematical thinking. And there are a host of research-based, vetted, tested measures to do that. The Maslach Burnout Inventory is one of the gold standards of you can give a quick assessment to your staff to see which dimension of burnout is impacting them the most. And then you could look at the areas of work satisfaction and work-life satisfaction of, okay, what are some of the causes that are getting in the way? So just collecting that data. And I think that step alone is more than what a lot of school districts are currently doing, of literally just asking and collecting data of how are you all doing? That's a key idea as well because again that pressure gets put on school leaders of like I need to find the thing and I need to bring in the donuts or I need to bring in the mindfulness expert where it's like just ask your staff like where are they at, what do they need, what kind of support would help. And then we start to move into the compassion mindset, which is I can A, empathize, like I know what that's like, but B, I'm going to come from a mindset of how do we reduce that problem? How do I not take this personally as it's my fault as a leader? How do I get to the root of what's really causing the challenge and work side by side with my staff to try to alleviate that. And then the last mindset that will be critical for that is creativity. Like we can't keep doing the same things over and over again because they're clearly not working. Some of our professional development systems aren't effective and they're not building efficacy for teachers. Some of the ways we keep bringing in new initiatives without really getting targeted with a few of them isn't currently working. And so there's plenty of research and strategies of how to bring in creative thinking and come up with new ideas. But that whole process, if you treat it kind of like a cycle, doing that alone can really help build empathy across the different levels of leadership and staff and really get at the root of what's affecting so many educators in America.
Well, and there's so much there, Chase. I mean,
Mm,
this idea, and this is a theme that Jen and I seem to bump into pretty
mm,
frequently, is that school leaders or leaders in general, leaders work on the system
hmm.
while being in the system, which
Right.
is tough, and it's tough to pull yourself out of that, take that balcony view and look at the system. And I think that's where you're super wise because you collect the data, and once you see the data, you can't unsee it. So,
Right.
like it's there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a fantastic strategy.
Mm,
And I'd also want to add, I really like that you started with mindsets. John Hattie has
mm,
written a lot about the power
mhm.
and the difference that it can make to have the right mindset. And I think historically, leaders are real do people, right? What do
Yeah.
we do? What do we do? How do we fix this? But to just stop and take a moment to think, how am I thinking about the problem? And how might I start to think my way out of it? Maybe we can't yoga our way out of it, but we can start to think our way out of it. And taking that moment. I mean, in education, we feel very strongly about, right, Carol Dweck and mindset, but
Hmm.
what about these other mindsets
Yeah.
that serve leaders and hence their communities really well? So I think people should pause and really linger around these mindsets as they're thinking about this issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when you do get into the my favorite, I absolutely love the work of Deci and Ryan and the work they've done
Hmm.
on self-determination theory and what humans need, and that you organized what humans need into what
Hmm.
we can do to address burnout. So do you want to talk about
Yeah.
those three needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence? Yes, we need food and water, but but very importantly, we do need the autonomy, relatedness, and competence, and how you translated those into three ways to address burnout.
Yeah, yeah, that was a huge aha moment for me. Like I remember the moment in my office when I saw the lineup between the dimensions of burnout and self-determination theory. And I guarantee I'm not the first one or the only one to think this, but at least like in that moment, I was like, holy cow, like these completely overlap if we dive a little bit deeper. And so one of the major dimensions of burnout, and this is something that's been researched by Maslock and Leiter over the past few decades, is exhaustion. It's almost always the starting point of burnout. And what often is happening is people are exhausted because their work resources do not line up with their work demands. And this is very key to every educator's life of like, I have more students to serve than I have time in the day to serve them. Or a school leader, I have more emails to respond to than I literally have time in the day to respond to them. And so when this exhaustion starts to build up, we lose a sense of that autonomy. And many of the structures within the system don't give educators the autonomy, the choice, and the ability to tackle those problems. So very often professional development is a top-down thing that is given to staff of like, hey, we think you need this, so here is the professional development we're going to approach. When many educators on the ground, they're like, that's not actually what I need. Like what I need is X and you're giving me Y. And as a result of that, I'm not able to fulfill those work demands because I don't have the right work resources. And so if we look at that lever of, okay, if my staff is feeling exhausted, if they're feeling completely disconnected with their work, like how do I bring in more opportunities to give them choice over their professional development, to help them work smarter, not harder within their tasks, to reduce that workload, to respond to those needs and those requests for more time in certain areas. And that simple thing again is multi-layered. You show your trust of your staff, you show that you care about them, you hear them, you can relate to them, and you empower them to move forward. And I don't know if we want to pause on that continuum or if you want to dive into the other ones as well.
Well, I just want to say one thing,
Mm,
that you mentioned in the book, that often when teachers are exhausted, right, and their
yeah.
performance starts to dip, the
Yeah.
response of leaders is to micromanage them, which I,
Yeah.
I definitely understand. I do that too. And so then when leaders micromanage teachers, then their performance drops even lower and they feel less ownership, when really we're trying to get to is that autonomy that Desi and Brian talk about. And so I appreciate you bringing that in. So anyone who's listening and feeling like, oh, my teachers aren't engaged or working, I need to tighten the grip. I need to tighten the grip to sort of understand that vicious cycle there.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those pieces of like, take some of that pressure off your shoulders as a school leader. Like, you don't have to solve everyone's problems for them, and you don't have to intervene and tell them what to do. Like, again, just asking and trying to respond to those requests will build trust. And also, like, educators are smart people. They know what they need. They know how to manage their workloads. And so that push, that enticement of like, ooh, I need to step in, I need to control, I might be micromanaging. Like, that's one of those cues of I need to step back, compassion mindset. I need to see what their actual problem is, and I have to try to help on the side alleviate that challenge.
I'm glad you brought the mindset back in, because, if your suggestions to leaders are help reduce teacher workload and increase autonomy, you say reduce teacher workload, and lead and principals say, what are you talking about? Like, there's so much to do. I'm already taking on, I just subbed 3 classes yesterday, right? But so if that's your knee-jerk reaction to hearing reduce teacher workload, go back to the 4 mindsets and think, how could I bring my compass, curiosity, compassion, and creativity mindset to this knee-jerk reaction about reducing teacher workload?
And we can get super nerdy here, because this is what I find fascinating, that the median amount of hours an American educator works per week is 54 hours, and 25 of those hours is typically the direct instruction piece, meaning over half of the workload that an educator is experiencing isn't direct student contact. It is meetings upon meetings, it is professional development, it is planning time, it is more meetings on top of that. And so those are the areas where we can look to, like, okay, I'm not going to try to like shift and change how you're teaching in the classroom, or I'm going to maybe try to support it as needed, but like, how can I free up even 30 minutes of your day so that you have the energy and the focus to be able to tackle the things that really matter in the classroom?
Do you see any hope with maybe AI with this in terms of reducing teacher workload? Because I feel like that's something that I think we're getting caught up in the students are going to use it to cheat thing.
Yeah.
Is its potential power for productivity when it comes to teachers, administrators, the central office, like everything.
100%. One of the major pieces I do when I'm working with schools and with teachers is work smarter, not harder. And we do deep dive into how artificial intelligence practices can help us reduce some of that workload. And I'm a huge nerd when it comes to like bread baking and cooking. And so like in my mind is this analogy of like a world-class chef. Like, they're probably, if they're baking bread, like the best bread in the world, they're probably not farming the wheat and planting the wheat and then harvesting the wheat and then processing it into grain and then like getting that grain into flour. Like, they're finding those initial sources with really good quality, but they're pouring their energy into actually, once they get the flour and they can start manipulating it, like that's their craft. And so many educators are literally like farming every element of their work. They're doing the deep dive into the literature, and they're trying to pull out the standards, and they're trying to craft good questions on their own, and they're trying to assess. And there's like so much of that if we can use high quality artificial intelligence for the initial finding or sourcing of that work, then we can pour our energy into the stuff that we are really experts at and real expertise. And I would encourage any school leader, educator listening, like, take 5 minutes and just start punching some prompts into AI like ChatGPT and see what it can do. I was blown away when I saw like how quality some of the stuff is of like, hey, I need to come up with 10 quiz questions tomorrow for my opening bell ringer. Like, boom, here it is. I punched it in like 30 seconds. And now I can spend more time actually looking at the engagement strategies of my lesson. It's absolutely a space where a lot of us can free up some of that workload. Great point.
I love it.
Nice connection, Mike. Yeah. So so the first element has to do with, addressing autonomy, or I like how you phrase it, helping your teachers go from distressed to empowered. And so the second element, helping teachers go from disconnected to engaged, is about the relatedness. You want to talk about that?
So more mnemonics coming in with the D moving into the E part, the disconnected to feeling engaged. Cynicism is a major dimension of burnout, and I don't think there's a single educator that goes into the profession cynical. I think we all come in with hope and resilience and desire to do well, but because of the systemic issues and the challenges that we're confronted with, a lot of us start to feel really disconnected. And this can be like, I feel disconnected from my values as an educator. Like, I care about this thing, but the practices in place in my school, like, aren't really getting at the root of this thing. This very often turns into disconnection, like staff to staff, or staff to student, or teacher to school leader, and vice versa, that we start to protect boundaries. And this is another one of those aha moments for me, was that oftentimes exhaustion is the first thing to rise in burnout, and then the other ones start to fall like dominoes. And I see this happen a lot with cynicism, where cynicism is a defense mechanism. We are becoming cynical to protect our emotional and our physical energy. And so new professional development comes in, it is way easier for me to be like, I'm not going to invest all my energy into this new PD system because I did last time, and then a new PD came in 2 years later. Like, I'm not going to waste my time. Or I poured my heart and soul into that student, and I tried everything to communicate with their parents and help support them, and then they just moved to another school. And so I don't know if I want to take that risk anymore. And so one of the most important pieces we can bring into our school systems is a strong sense of relatedness, of I feel a sense of trust and reconnection, not only to my purpose and my values, but to the people right in front of me. And the analogy here that I like to make is looking at the idea of an immune system, where our physical immune system, like, we're never going to be able to avoid every virus, every germ, every moment of sickness. Like, there's going to be negativity, there's going to be bad, there's going to be challenge. But if I can build my immune system, if I can come from a place of like, I have health within me, I know that I'm not going to be completely overtaken by those viruses. And school systems are the same way, that we're not going to be able to deal with all those challenges and not have this like fake positivity, like bad stuff's going to happen. But if I can trust my colleagues to stand by me, or if I can build strong relationships with parents, or if I know my school leader, we both support each other's work, then it doesn't matter what challenges go on around us. Like, this sense of relatedness can help us feel re-engaged with our work.
I like your immune analogy. I kind of like the bank analogy too, that if we build relationships, every time we're building a relationship, you're sort of putting deposits into the bank, so that when there will be some breach of trust, there will be something that's deeply upsetting to teachers, and those are like the withdrawals. So you want to have many more deposits than you want to have withdrawals.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do appreciate the second piece of the cynicism too, which is about like the hypocrisy, right? That we say to teachers, oh, we value collegiality, and then as leaders, we take away all their PLC or meeting time because they have to, come to a mandatory meeting or sub or something like that. So just the other antidote, the idea of really leading with integrity as much as you can, and say when you can't. But if you say you're going to do something, then do it.
Yeah, and I think we've all worked for someone in our lives when we saw them be authentic and clear, even when they made a mistake. Like, that builds relational trust. And so again, we don't have to have like perfectionism of we're not going to have rifts or challenges or like things that were unexpected that are going to negatively impact people, but to have the ability to be like, hey, I made a mistake. Here's what happened. Here's what support I could moving forward. Here, how do I rebuild that trust and shift it into a question? Like, those are pieces that are really, really important. If you know that the people beside you, above you, those you serve, we're all working towards our best, it makes it much easier to overcome some of those challenges that arise.
So, Chase, we want to be sensitive to your time. You've been so generous with us so far. Any parting shots or things that, if you were going to wave the magic wand and say, school administrators, if you all just did this or this.
Could we sneak in? Could we sneak in the third dimension? Do we have 5 minutes, Mike, before we do that? And then, keep the magic wand. But yeah, I think, this last piece, people don't always realize the sort of the competence that a lot of what happened during the pandemic is teachers had to teach online, and there's a real sense of loss of competence, and that's a big part of the burnout piece. So could you talk about how we deal with the third aspect, helping our teachers move from defeated to efficacious, another D to E?
Yeah, and we can absolutely bridge the gap of like final thoughts around this, because ultimately, if we can build school systems where individuals are building competence, then a lot of the challenges in front of us can be tackled more easily. Our workloads can be managed more easily. Our challenges with students who are like coming in at lower grade level and more challenging social emotional skills than before, like we can overcome those things if we are building some efficacy around that. And efficacy is one of those pieces that just because you have veteran status doesn't mean you're going to not take hits to your efficacy. Anytime there's a new shift or change, our efficacy is in limbo. And I think every educator in America, in the world, from 2020 on, felt that hit. And so I think if we were to look at like what is the most important thing a school leader can do, if we come back to those mindsets, the illuminating mindsets of one of the best questions I think a school leader can ask their staff. Like if you do one thing, next staff meeting, ask your staff this question: what is one thing I can do to help support you doing your job more effectively? And then just listen to the responses. Now, some of them might be like very specific. Maybe a teacher's like, hey, I'm really struggling with this student. Like I need some coaching, some support around that. It could be more trends where we're like, ooh, I'm realizing that a lot of my staff feel fatigued by the amount of workload coming their way. Parent-teacher conferences are coming up. We have to add in additional expectations. We're short on staff. And so maybe we should hire some more building subs if we can. Just number one, asking that question. And then from there, this isn't something we have to feel like we have to fix overnight. If you can hear those responses and start to help either collectively or individually build like a scaffold, I call it an efficacy ladder of like, okay, top level goal, like what do you want? What do you want your job to look like? How can I help improve this? And then let's start to work backwards. How can I help you within 24 hours feel like you're making a little bit more progress towards this? How can I help you, a month from now, what would it look like to know that I'm hearing your requests and responding to it? And that simple exchange of just asking what's the most important thing and then trying to build a plan and work with that plan and focus on that plan. Like, I think that is such a key component for so many people to feel a sense of hope, to feel a sense that you're heard, but to also have a map of like, okay, even if it's bad right now, I at least know we're working together to make it better for tomorrow.
I love that idea of just asking, what's one thing I can do? You'll get the ones, well, you could do your job and fix discipline, but, but you are going to get thoughtful people. And I think about that too a lot, that especially newly minted administrators feel like they have to have the answers and everything. And I found I got much better results over time when some initiative would be coming from the district office. And, the first thing is, okay, initiative fatigue. What can we make sure we stop doing if we're going to start doing this and be explicit about it? You mentioned that, which is huge, but also even just asking people, saying, listen, this is the thing. Like, this is something we have to do because we're part of a larger system. Like, what makes sense in our little part of the system? How should we approach it? And like asking that question, maybe of the whole staff, or maybe of your building union reps, if you have a good relationship with them, or your teacher leaders, like some way to get a sense of, okay, this is what we have to do. Like, I'm thinking this, but I might be missing something. What's the best way to approach it?
Yeah.
And I also think that 24-hour period too, that doesn't only help with the efficacy of the teachers, but leaders too. Like, you can make an impact. You can do something small. There's low hanging fruit. There are things that we can do to support our teachers too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe we end on this hopeful note, Mike.
Yeah, I think it's a hopeful note. I think it's good. We're going to forget about all those statistics we heard at the beginning and recognize that as leaders, we do have efficacy. And part of that, part of that ability to improve the system is to work on the system and to work with the people in the system, which I feel message. And Chase Mielke, thanks for taking time. The book is Illuminate the Way, The School Leader's Guide to Addressing and Preventing Teacher Burnout. Awesome.
Thank you both for having me on.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.